Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Oh, Tony, it's my favorite kind of show. Not just a listener question show, but a listener question show where Kevin Noon takes some strays. So I really can't wait. We did one yesterday. We have even more great questions. We really appreciate when you guys send us some good questions to talk about because we are not here to hear ourselves talk, no matter what you may think. We are here to tell you guys what you want to know, and this is a great way for us to do it. So, Tony, can I start with the Kevin Noon slander? Is that okay?
Please, don't let me stand in your way.
Okay, so the first question is from everyone all together, since it's Kevin Noon slander. Jordan Kapler, our good buddy Jordan, always insightful. He says, can I have Kevin Noon's media credentials? He's obviously not using them. Also, has anyone checked in how Jerry Emig is doing post-Ryan Day's interviews? I will handle the second half of that question, Tony. You can get to the credential question and Kevin's worthiness or lack thereof later. So in case you guys missed this, during the post-game on-air interview where Ryan Day went off on Lou Holtz, you could, right before the interview started, kind of hear Jerry, who is the longtime Ohio State sports information director, in the background telling Ryan Day, take a deep breath, and Ryan Day saying, watch this, which is just, I don't know how we haven't gotten T-shirts printed up already, because that is an incredible interaction. 10 of 10, no notes. Jerry's doing fine. Ryan didn't say any bad words or anything on air, so I think it was fine. And I think, I don't think Ryan represented the school badly or anything like that. I don't think that's, he's in a beef with a, octogenarian, nonagenarian, whatever, however old Lou Holtz is. But, that felt like, first of all, I think everyone needs to understand who that rant was directed at. And it was not really directed at Lou Holtz. Ostensibly it was directed at Lou Holtz. Really, that was Ryan Day sticking up for his players and making sure his players saw that Ryan Day was sticking up for his players. And that's what that was really all about. But, no, I don't think, I think Jerry's doing just fine. We saw Jerry during interviews on Wednesday. He seemed in exactly as good spirits as he always is. So, yes, it has not affected the Minnesota Nice at all. I am pleased to report.
We'll leave Kevin out of this.
No. Our
okay,
listener.
Let's talk about it then. I was trying to be the bigger person, Tom. I would say, is it obvious that he's not using them? I wasn't sure if it was obvious. I wasn't sure if other people knew that he's not using his credentials. But he was at. You know what? I was sitting next to him at the game. He was definitely using them. Although he uses credentials to get in. I don't know what else he's doing with them. I'm not asking for a timesheet or anything like that yet. But he was there. Regarding Jerry, and I may have mentioned this on another show, but Jerry was also at Basketball Media Day on Tuesday or Monday, whichever day it was. And Gary Pettit, the basketball SID, before Holtman sat down at the table, and as he's getting ready to talk, Gary told him, take a breath. And I don't think Holtman understood it, but those of us in attendance did. I should have looked over to see what Jerry's reaction was to that, because that was quite a hat tip there. I do wonder, Tom, somebody texted me, a listener, a viewer texted me, and this is what happens. If you catch me out in the wild, I will give you my phone number. You can text me. Asked, what's the over-under on number of questions that Ryan Day gets about Lou Holtz the next time we talk to him, which will be on Tuesday. And I put it at 2.5, because after the first one, Ryan Day's going to be like, look, I moved on. I was defending my players. And then there might be a follow-up of that same thing. And Day will be like, I'm not really interested in talking about that anymore. And then one of the last questions, there may be a third question to come in, back to the Lou Holtz thing. I know you don't want to talk about it, so I set it at 2.5. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, boy, I was thinking over under 1.5, because you get the answer and then he sort of says he doesn't want to talk about it anymore. And then maybe you get one more. But, it does feel like you might get a quickie right at the end there if the issue is still sort of lingering a little bit. So, yeah, 2.5 is a pretty good line. If it's 2.5, I'm going to take the under, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes over. If it was if they had another game this week and we had a Tuesday press conference, you're probably getting asked about that 6 times in some different form or fashion. And, when he says, I don't want to talk about it anymore, people come up with a creative, different way, like, listen, hey, we got to talk about the defensive line. Now, what do you think Lou Holtz would think about your defensive line? Something like that. It's not, with a 10 days having passed between when it initially happened and when we're actually going to talk to him the next time, it's kind of old news at that point. You're moving on to Maryland and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, 2.5 is a good line.
And he is going to want to move on from it. And eventually we will. And we have moved on from it, but it becomes this storyline, this clickbait type of thing. Like, if people are still clicking on it, then it's still going to be getting written about and asked about. And so it becomes its own thing. But I think Ryan Day is just going to want to move on from it. I said what I said. There was a lot of pent up emotion there. And it's like one of those things where you've had a really bad day and the first person you see is the one that gets the brunt of whatever you're feeling. And that was, something that he was ramped up to say something, and he knew who he was targeting and what he was doing, because again, watch this. I mean, that's, yeah, take a deep breath, huh? I got your deep breath right here. And then he goes off. And so, then it becomes it's a come after me, I'm a man, I'm 40 type of thing. And Tom, do you remember that player who Mike Gundy was saying that about Bobby Reed? Do you know he is now 37 years old?
Wow. Boy, I was not emotionally ready for that reveal. That was, oh boy, I was trying to remember who it was. And I remember it was a quarterback who then he was not the starting quarterback for that much longer, if I remember correctly, which is sort of the subtext of that whole, or the denouement of that story is, he was a big believer in him until he wasn't. I'm going to guess that, 37 years old. Holy smokes. That's
3 more years. He's going to be able to fight his own battles.
Not. All right. We're just going to move on. Next one from Langdon Alger. What is Ohio State's offensive identity? Right now, its team that struggles in short yardage is a good chunk of Ohio State's offensive identity. I think Ohio State's offensive identity is a team that's still sort of figuring it out. They have made progress with the offensive line. They have made progress with the quarterback position. The running backs, I think they are, they have sort of figured out who their running backs are and what the rotation is there. I think they have done a good job getting Cade Stover involved, but I think it's still a work in progress. And if they can get the short yardage thing sorted out, and we talked about that a bunch on yesterday's show, so I'm not going to dive into that again, but if they can get the short yardage thing figured out where, okay, here's what we're going to do, and we're going to be able to do these, this is going to be our base run play. This is going to be what and then you have stuff coming off of that, because you can't obviously just run the same thing over and over and over again. Just hearing that Urban Meyer ran the same thing over and over and over again in short yardage, and Jim Tressel did too. Hey, that's interesting. But you can't just run literally the same exact thing over and over and over again. So you have to have some stuff off of that. But if they want to run inside zone out of the pistol in short yardage until someone stops it, go ahead and do that, and then do some variations of stuff off of that. Okay, and then you also have a slant to Marvin Harrison off of that, and then you also have a little play action where you dump it off to a tight end off of that, or whatever it is. That's fine. Or you have Kyle McCord keeps it off of that, whatever it is. It feels like their offensive identity overall is a work in progress, but a lot closer than it was 4 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I think their offensive identity right now is balance. They have thrown the ball 134 times this year, and they've run it 138. That's about as balanced as you're going to get at Ohio State. And, they rush for about the same yards per carry as they have the first 2 games. They're at 4.7. In this game, they're at 4.6 in the other 2. However, the 61-yarder was just about half of their entire rushing total, and you take that away, and they're at 2.5 yards per carry, which is a more representative number. So I do think there are issues. They have to get the running game fixed. That's that's not any surprise because, as you said, Tom, that's kind of their identity right now. It's a running game that has struggled, is struggling. And I asked this on the Mark Rogers show. Is this an offense that if they were to play Penn State this week, would you expect them to rush for 100 yards without one of those 60-yarders?
I don't think so. I mean, I just watched Penn State look pretty good against Iowa, but that doesn't really tell me anything. I wouldn't expect them. I wouldn't feel super, super confident that they're going to run for 100 yards if the long run is 18 or something like that. It just feels like, balance is an interesting idea. And, is balance because they want to be balanced, or is balance because they don't know what they want to be either, and they're just kind of trying to do a bunch of stuff and try and figure out what they are, and then they'll get a little bit more? Because balance does not necessarily mean you're running and passing the same number of times. Balance means you are in a situation where you can do both things. And if you're not as good of a running team, like the way Mike Leach used to run the ball, they threw the ball 80% or 85% or 90% of the time. But then when they wanted to run the ball, they could run the ball because the defense was so keyed to the pass that you could run the ball too. I don't, Ohio State's not going to be 80% pass or 80% run, but I don't think, I don't think they're going to end the year 50-50 on that either. Do you?
No, but I do think it's also balanced to not be able to run or throw in short yardage down. That is also a balance. Not a great balance. It's like a seesaw that has no middle point. It's just flat on the ground, no up or down. It's there. Not really fun to ride and whatnot. But no, I'm not expecting that. I do wonder at this point, is that balance that you're still trying to find yourself? That gives some question to the defense as well, because what the defense is also asking, hey, where are they hanging their hat? And they're looking around the room looking for a coat rack or whatever, and there's no coat rack. And so you're still trying to figure out what kind of room am I in? That sort of thing. Should I wear the hat? What am I doing with this umbrella? That sort of thing. Should I put it in my pocket? No.
I'm not sure I've ever seen a pocket-sized umbrella, and I'm not sure how much that would fold out. But that's, Tony, that feels like a question we need to address on another show.
Depends on the size of the pocket.
That's true. You and your Junkos. Junkos? I don't know. You remember the Kevin Smith pants. Anyway, speaking of Kevin Smith, not at all. At T_B4U, Tony, how likely do you think it is that Ohio State will put out 5 defensive linemen if a team comes out in 22 personnel? That would be 2 backs, 2 tight ends, 1 wide receiver, not around the red zone. If you've got a team in 22 personnel, middle of the field, could you see Ohio State going with a 5 defensive line alignment?
So 22 being 2 running backs and 2 tight ends, 1 wide receiver. No, I would, unless we're talking about 4 defensive linemen, and here comes the jack, and then the jack being primarily a run disruptor, and so maybe in that regard. But the way this team is able to give up pass completions to tight ends, I don't know that you want to take more guys away from dropping into a zone, basically, unless you're going to do some zone blitzing and have some of those defensive ends or even the defensive tackles that we saw drop back into a zone, that sort of thing. I don't know. Notre Dame had some success running with the 2 backs. And what we did see instead of 5 defensive linemen when they were doing the 22 is they brought in Cody Simon for Davis and Igbinosun. So they went with a 4-3 basically, and generally also had Sonny Styles out there. So almost a 4-4, if you will, at times. But I don't know. I don't know what their preference is, what Jim Knowles' preference is, what Larry Johnson's preference is for that, whether they like the 4-3 with Sonny being a 4-4, or if they might go to a 5. I don't recall seeing them in a 5-man front outside of short yardage, ever, outside of if we want to talk about a 4-3 with sometimes maybe the jack being in there as well. And I don't know how, I don't know how often we will see that, but I'm not expecting 5 defensive linemen in this kind of situation.
Unless you're in a goal line situation, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think back to when Ohio State used to put Orlando Pace in goal line situations on the defensive line. But I mean, A, that was 25 years ago, and B, that's not this situation we're talking about here where it's sort of middle of the field. Larry Johnson has been a 4-down guy for as long as I can remember. It just feels like you're not going to, they don't really get out of that base at any point, in terms of the 4-down linemen. I don't really think you're going to see that at least in the situation we're talking about here. Next one from @fun_magnets. Speaking of fun, it's 4th and 1 at Michigan's 39-yard line. 2 minutes left. Down for Ohio State is in a jumbo formation. How confident should we be? I get that you take a win against a top 10 team on the road any way you can get it, but I don't feel better about short yardage after that game. And we've talked a bunch about short yardage. I think if they're in the jumbo formation, I mean, I guess the question is, how much better has the offensive line gotten between now and then? Because when we've watched Michigan this year, the interior of Michigan's defensive line has been pretty good this year. And that's been, I think, maybe one of my bigger surprises with Michigan on the positive side, is how much better the interior of that defensive line is. I thought losing Mozzie Smith, they might take a little bit of a step back, but Chris Jenkins and even someone like Kenneth Grant, who Ohio State looked at and passed on, and is now turned into a really solid role player for Michigan. You don't know until you see Michigan play an actual team with a pulse, which we have still not seen a month into the season. But, if Ohio State's in a jumbo formation, unless you want to interpret this as, well, obviously they figured out the jumbo formation issues if they're still running this 8 weeks from now. But, it sure feels to me like, Tony, if you want to feel good about Ohio State in 4th and 1 against Michigan, you should have Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison out there, even if not just if you want to throw to them, but also just that probably pulls some bodies out of the box if you've got those guys out there.
Yeah, because even my thought on having that kind of jumbo formation, I don't like it. Whoever's doing it, I don't like it, even if whatever the team is or struggling or not. I just don't like putting all 22 people in the same area when you're trying to move forward. The math just doesn't work out for me, and the mass doesn't work out because there's only so much forward you can do when there's basically 5 layers of wall between trying to stop you. And so it's not maybe the most direct way, but I don't think it is the best way, unless you are one of these teams that you're always, this is what you do, this is who you are. And not that Ohio State can't do this or can't be that, but they have other ways of going about it. And strangely, I feel like if other teams were to do it, they would pick it up. So clearly, this is also an Ohio State thought. Like, I don't like it regardless, but when I see another team, or when you see anybody but Ohio State doing it, it's like, well, it's only 1 yard. Clearly, they're going to get it, because how can you stop this? And yet, watching it from the Ohio State side, it's like, well, how can you even get this? And there's certainly some Ohio State issues there that are the main thrust of why they're not getting it. But overall, I just don't like having 22 people all in a situation. And when you have the quarterback, you're automatically being outnumbered because you take him out of the play as the guy giving the ball away.
That's especially true now that quarterback sneaks are illegal. Next one from Matt, Ohio State of Mind. Does Maryland pose a similar threat as they did last year? Tony, we went back and looked through some box scores just to sort of see what Maryland's doing, because I got to tell you, Maryland's first month of the season has been pretty anonymous. They are unbeaten right now. Who's their best win? Shut up. Stop asking these impertinent questions. Maryland, I mean, they beat Towson State week 1, 38-6. They beat Charlotte 38-20. Charlotte has not been particularly good. Although they did just kind of make Florida look gross. So maybe Charlotte's one of those bad teams that you sort of, like a sea monster, kind of pulls you down into a bad game. But Maryland was down 14-0 against Charlotte, like 3 minutes and 10 seconds into the game. Charlotte scored on a 48-yard touchdown pass, and then 10 seconds later, first play from scrimmage, scored on a 16-yard pick six. So they were down 14-0. Maryland was 3 minutes and 10 seconds into the game, and they ended up winning at 38-20, but you're down 14-0. They're down 14-0 against UVA. Virginia's no great shakes this year. They ended up winning that 42-14. they were, they played Michigan State and kind of held Michigan State, I mean, what Michigan State is this year, and it is not outstanding. And that one was 7-0 after the first quarter, and 21-3 at halftime, 21-9 after three quarters. I don't know quite what kind of conclusions to draw about this Maryland team, because they really haven't played anyone where they've really been pushed, for 4 full quarters, because they've played a bunch of bad teams. Maryland, to me, in general, though, is super dangerous, or at least dicey, when you're playing them in College Park, and basically roadkill when you play them in Columbus. So just based on that alone, and the fact that you haven't really seen anything, I think they're probably going to end up being the 4th best team in the Big Ten East, but I think there's a pretty big drop off between 3 and 4.
They might be the 4th best team in the Big Ten, though, as well. Just looking like right now they're number 2 in scoring. They're, I think, number 4 in scoring defense, behind the top 3 in the Big Ten East. But again, they're not playing too many world beaters right now. And it's only going to change so much, because everybody in the Big Ten East plays the same teams, and it's like you'll know how good you are once you play the other teams. But we do know, like, Maryland always has some skill. They've obviously got a very confident quarterback who is capable of big games, capable of destructive games as well. And so it's just a matter of which one of those are you going to get? Which one of those are you going to force? He already has 3 interceptions this season in 4 games. So that's kind of but also he's a very confident guy against some lackluster competition. So I think he's going to take some chances, but he's also going to take chances against everybody. And we've seen him come through in the clutch against Ohio State. And so you have to kind of expect him to be at his best. And that's what you prepare for, talking about Talia Tagovailoa. And yet, how well are they going to contain Ohio State? That game it's always interesting in different ways. It's not one that I really feel too much concern for Ohio State's part, especially, as you said, this being in Columbus. It becomes, it's bigger than Indiana, but it's like a Purdue, Illinois type in Ohio Stadium, where you're going to take it seriously, but it should be a 3 or 4 touchdown game.
And you're coming in off of a week off, so this is not a letdown situation coming in off of Notre Dame. Like, if it was this weekend, okay, you could see a little bit more of a threat coming in off Notre Dame. You never know how a team's going to bounce back from an off week, but this is a location and timing thing. When has Ohio State really struggled against Maryland? They've struggled against Maryland in the week before the Michigan game in 2018, and then the week before the Michigan game in 2020. And you've got the look-ahead factor, you've got the road game factor. Both of those, I think, are probably pretty significant factors here. I mean, I have not gone back and pulled up the series history, but just off the top of my head, it feels like Ohio State hangs 60 points on Maryland a lot when they play in Columbus. So, that, and at some point that sort of stops being a coincidence, where, I'm not expecting this year's Ohio State team to hang 60 on Maryland, or on this year's Maryland team. But I mean, Tony, how many times has that happened where the Buckeyes have just completely put Maryland in a blender in Columbus?
Well, I've got the Winsipedia page open, and so they have played 8 times all time, and 4 of those times in Columbus. The scores of those, the most recent first, would be 2021. It was 66-17. Then 2 years earlier, it was 73-14. Then in 2017, it was 62-14. And in 2015, it was a very close 49-28. Now, the College Park, Maryland has scored 30, 51, then a 62-3 loss, and a 52-24. So we remember the 52-51. Last year's game was much closer than it should have been, but nothing. I mean, when the closest game is 49-28 in Columbus, I'm not expecting. I don't know what to necessarily expect, because I'm still waiting for this Ohio State offense to be something worth expecting. Because they could come out and score 24, talking about Ohio State, or they could score 64. At this point, you don't know what they're we know what they're capable of. We don't know what they're going to consistently produce at this point. But I feel like this is an Ohio State win, and the concern level on a scale of 1 to 10, Tom, it is, as we said, possibly the number 4 team in the Big Ten, but I don't put it above like a 5.5.
Yeah, I might not even be at a 5.5 on this one. It feels like that's a 4 or so to me, where, yeah, you could potentially have some really crazy stuff happen, and hey, you throw a pick six early, and you turn it over again, and you have a bust in the secondary, and Maryland gets up, and you have to dig out of a hole, and okay, maybe, but it feels like it's going to take something significant like that happening for Ohio State to lose that game. So I'll put the concern level there at a 4, and then don't worry, there'll be plenty of games to be concerned about later. This to me, this is not a bad team, but it's also not a team that I'm expecting to be able to come into Columbus and make this a 60-minute game. All right, so let's do our last one, and this is from at Brock77411489. Has Ryan Day gone full heel turn on the rest of college football? What would be his theme music, Tony? I'm going to defer to you on the professional wrestling. I feel like this is a little more in your wheelhouse than mine.
I feel bad because we could make this an entire show, and it would require a bunch more prep and a lot of thought process going into this. But in terms of being the heel, like what was he before? Was he obviously Michigan fans didn't like him, and then they started to disregard him once Michigan won 2 in a row, and we know the Michigan fan base then takes on that kind of tenor in terms of no respect, and then you have Jim Harbaugh talking about the third base stuff. So that is their viewpoint of him. I don't know what the viewpoint outside of that of the Ohio State Michigan world is on him, but he certainly woke some people up with what he said after the game, talking about Lou Holtz. And in wrestling terms, Tom, the worst thing that you can do is to have nobody care about you, nobody talk about you. The best thing that you can do, good or bad, is have people talk about you. And whether they like you or they don't like you, they have to learn to love you, Tom. And just as long as people feel something, that's the main goal. And I think people now feel something for one way or another. Ryan Day, is it a heel turn? Maybe nationally, but Ric Flair was the greatest heel of all time, but they loved him in North Carolina. And so I think that's what you got here. Ryan Day may be a heel to the rest of the nation, but not North Carolina, or, if you will, Columbus and the surrounding Tri-Cities area. So, no, and then, Tom, in terms of theme music, there's some DX stuff, Degeneration X stuff from back in the day that I bet Ryan Day would be like that. I guarantee you, being a New Hampshire guy, he listened to all that. He watched all of that stuff. So I would say, maybe some like, oh, you didn't know type of theme music that would bring out, and then Ryan Day, would be on the mic the entire time coming out of the tunnel, like leading the team, basically. Like, instead of the band, get rid of, no offense, we don't need to biddle out there anymore. We've got production now. And so the music would hit, and then Ryan Day would come out and say, oh, you didn't know, you're blank, better call somebody. And then he would introduce the team and introduce himself. And there you go from there. And then what happens after that? What happens at halftime? What happens at the end of the game? That's the beauty and the art and the psychology, Tom, of wrestling.
Well, is he coming out and doing all that and then telling Jerry Emig, watch this, and then doing the chop? Is that what? Because, boy, we had the question earlier about Jerry's response and how Jerry was doing. I don't think Jerry would be doing quite as well if there was a chop involved in that. And Tony, follow-up question: would the promo he cut on Lou Holtz be considered cheap heat or not?
No, there is no. Well, no. And here's the thing that wrestling has also done that I was thinking about as I saw this question earlier today. Every few years, there comes a guy who then he runs a storyline where he's beating up on the old superstars. And I think Randy Orton did this like 20 years ago. They called him the Legend Killer, and he's beating up on like Hacksaw Jim Duggan and Ricky Steamboat and Mae Young and all of these older wrestlers who are still like, yeah, I'll take $10,000 and get thrown off a top rope. That is what it is. And you've got a guy in Lou Holtz who has had his share of, I mean, he's had the neck brace. He can be physical. We know that. And maybe he can take a punch. I don't know. It's all scripted anyway, but that would be, there's no shame in calling somebody out like that, or it's not elder abuse. These are all workers, Tom. They're all telling the same story about getting somebody over. And it's up to another thing about wrestling here, Tom. It is up to the older guys to then pass on to the younger guys, get the younger guys over. They shouldn't be out there for themselves. And I think that's what Lou Holtz did. He went, as they say, Tom, he went into business for himself. And he shouldn't have, and Ryan Day put him back in his place.
Did Lou Holtz work himself into a shoot, in your opinion?
1,000%, Tom, and everybody else has as well. And then for Lou Holtz to double down on this, that's too much. It's too much, Lou. Because at some point, now maybe they're building up to WrestleMania, and that's coming in March, April. And this is the time when that starts to build. You just start laying the groundwork. Now, you can't let it go super hot, by December, because you've still got 3 or 4 months of work to do to get it home. So maybe you just stoke the fire every now and again. One day, it'll be maybe a game in November, and Lou Holtz's music hits at halftime, and it's like, oh, that's right. These two guys are still feuding.
What is Lou Holtz's music in this case? Is it like Glenn Miller or something like that? What is Lou Holtz's entrance music?
I was going to say maybe some Lawrence Welk, but how about Oh Danny Boy?
Did Pat Boone record Oh Danny Boy? It feels like that would maybe be the choice there.
Maybe, some of the wrestlers, they come out to their own music that they sang. So, Tom, if you could do Danny Boy in Lou Holtz voice.
Man, now I'm trying to picture it. Now, where does my mind go every time we talk about, someone trying to do some kind of a song? I'm trying to picture Lou Holtz doing Snow's Informer, and boy,
there's
no way. I'm not even going to, Tony, this is one of these moments where you have to know your limits. And I know that while I could probably get 3 words in, that's probably about as far as it would go. So I'm going to be smart and, going to cash in my money in the bank here and, let you close the show.
I like how you're like, I'm gonna throw the wrestling to you, then you're just dropping all of the stuff in. Like, yeah, come on, Tom. We know. You're a mark.
The Mets podcast I listen to is run by 2 guys who are big prospect writers, but also who are big pro wrestling fans. So I have just sort of by osmosis picked up plenty of pro wrestling over the years. So could I pick Kota Ibushi out of a lineup? No. Have you heard the name 50 times? Yes.
You're even into the wow, Tom. You are a wrestling nerd. Anyway, let's end the show on that. That's a fantastic way to end the show, Tom. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank you for the questions, especially Tom loves the wrestling questions, so feel free to just continue to throw those in. He'll drop in all kinds of, he'll talk Mid-South 1987. He'll talk New Japan 2025. Like, he will do all of it and everything in between. You want to talk about Jake Snake's run in WWF. You want to talk about what he's doing now. You want to talk about him back in, WWWA or whatever. He's there for you. Maybe don't do it so much on the show. Just reach out to him on Twitter at Tom Orr 4. He will give you all of his wrestling takes there. So absolutely thank you all for joining us. You can become a member at Buckeye Huddle right now. Don't worry about wrestling questions there. We will delete them. Tom will try to save them and answer them, but I will strike them for the record. You know what? When I said, reach out to me if you see me out in the wild, you can have my phone number. I will give you Tom's number, and then you can just text him about wrestling as well. So feel free to do that. Also find us at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle, facebook.com/Buckeye Huddle. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.